My son at the time was 3, and he said to me one night, "Dad, why are you always at work?" Something had to be done. We weren't very happy with the offerings we had, and we thought we could build better, and we said, let's have a go at this. Everyone says, yeah, I really like what you're doing. I'm really keen, but I'm not going to be first. Until you've got a signed contract and got your first payment, or maybe your second payment, you're not in. We're working on a contract. We were very, very close, within days of signing with them. It would have made a massive difference to us at the time. And a competitor came in and threatened legal action. Probably the single most stressed I've been in the job was when hearing the call to say, no, we're not going with you now. There was a misconfiguration and something went wrong, and we got blamed for it. And it was really hard for us to wear that.
So I assume it was not your fault.
It was not our fault. We're all over the globe, all over the map, as it were. We're in London, Channel Islands, South Africa and Malawi, Vietnam, Argentina and Kazakhstan. We're doing over 200,000 trades a day.
Welcome to the Startup Theatre podcast. This podcast is produced by Empire Films.
Hi, welcome to Startup Theatre. I am Adrienne Muir, and alongside me we've got my co-host,
Serge Van Dam.
We have no Troy today. Troy is still travelling the world?
Yes, he is.
Are we missing Troy?
Yeah, I don't know if missing him, but he's in the desert. He could be lost for all we know.
Hey, listen, good to see you. How have you been?
I've been great.
Yeah?
Been great. Looking forward to today.
Yeah, now listen, for those who don't know, today's a little bit of probably a bit of a personal one for me. Like a lot of people are like, so you're doing the podcast, but you're back from London, what are you doing? And I'm the CEO of Avenir Technology, and for a long time I've really wanted to bring Martyn Bain, and I've known him for a very long time. We worked together at NZX, and one of the reasons coming back after a long time in London and working for a company like Avenir is because it's really cool. It's very good, and Martyn's got a really interesting story. So I expect that I'll probably be having a little bit more of a chit-chat to him because I know a bit of the story, but actually fundamentally this is a founder story. It was Martyn who had the guts alongside his other founders to take the leap out of an exchange and to build technology and sell it around the world. And he's had the hits, and now we're working together kind of growing a global brand and competing against some really big companies. But fundamentally, I want people to listen and really recognise too that it is hard, but equally it's doable. And Martyn's a boy from the heart who, as we know, likes to surf, and he's got a couple of kids, and he's a big family man, but he's also taken on board a big founding piece of company, and it's a great story. So I'm hoping you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think his story is as well relatable for many people because he's spent his time in corporate like you and I have.
Yeah.
He saw an opportunity because of his corporate job, and he's built an enterprise business selling to, big or biggish companies around the world. So I think it'd be very relatable to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find with Martyn too is he's telling the story, but people will want to listen. And at the end of the day, Martyn is just a really great guy who's made some great decisions around stuff, and he's building a great team, obviously, in many ways. But his team are really proud of him. We're really proud of what is happening within Avenir, and hopefully there'll be some decent nuggets in here for people to listen to.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, so let's welcome him on.
Today's guest is brought to you by Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for global frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, saving you time and money, helping you build customer trust. Over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Sharesies and Flossy all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. I actually had dinner with the whole Vanta team, and I knew instantly that they would be the sponsor on the podcast. They just genuinely care about startups, and to make it go even one better, they've actually decided that my audience gets a special offer of $1,000 USD off from Vanta. All you have to do is go to vanta.com/startup theatre and enjoy your $1,000 USD off now.
Okay, so welcome, Martyn. It is an absolute pleasure to have you sitting on the couch with us today, isn't it, Serge?
It certainly is. Welcome, Martyn.
Welcome, Martyn. Now, just to the listeners and viewers, so full transparency, I haven't known Martyn as long as I've known you, Serge, which is, we won't go into that, showing our age, but I have known you, Martyn, for, I think I was around when your first child was born, and he's what, 21? 22?
He's 21.
He's 21. Martyn also was lucky enough to be dancing at my wedding some time ago as well. So we have known each other for a long time. And of course, branded up today because we work for the same company. But I am really excited because I think this is a really interesting story. And Serge and I are all about the interesting stories. And Troy's away. So we're like, let's get in all the people we've always wanted to talk to. And one of the things that I get feedback on, Martyn, is, hey, cool, you're sitting on the couch, but what does Avenir do? And I was like, listen, not my story to tell, certainly yours. I'm really interested because I know that we worked together and we worked together in exchanges and worked at NZX here in Wellington many moons ago. But take me back in terms of the origin of, we've got a number of people here. Did you just hate working for a corporate? That what made you kind of move on and think, you know what, I'm gonna do a startup?
I think the catalyst, it's not the only reason, but the main reason was my son at the time was 3.
Yeah.
And he said to me one night, Dad, why are you always at work?
Did he?
And that really hit hard.
Yeah.
And it was, something had to be done.
Right.
I was a bit burnt out at work, I think, suffering from some projects, probably trying to find a way out. And that was the thing that made it happen. One of the projects we'd been working on, we were involved with vendors who we weren't very happy with the offerings we had, and we thought we could build better. It was a bit of an in-house joke that we thought we could build this much better.
Which happens, yeah.
But so I guess the combination of those two things was the catalyst. I left NZX, reflected for a while, and then the crew, as it were, got back together again. And we said, let's have a go at this.
And NZX, for listeners who may not be familiar, is the New Zealand Stock Exchange.
Yeah, that was a while ago. I mean, interestingly, in terms of our paths, I went and worked for one of the vendors to try and change it a bit, and Martyn went off and created a product with some people from NZX and a bit of a crew from there. It's a really interesting, we talk about this all the time with our founders. It's a really interesting pivot when you kind of have the guts to do that. And I totally get that when you've got a 3-year-old looking you in the eye, and we've got a lot of that comes out with people sitting on a couch, like, actually, I wasn't getting what I wanted out of that job. Family became really important to me. I wanted to make a pivot that gave me a bit more scope. And then they go on to talk about just how hard it's been and how much their kids now literally like, tell us about Avenir, Dad. But when you sort of made that leap to leave, full respect to a number of people that came out of NZX and have moved on and done things, what was it that kind of took you to that next sort of level? And, how do you do that? We've got listeners here, they're like, how do you choose a founder? What are the next steps? Tell us a bit about that journey for us, Martyn.
It wasn't immediate. I had to have time to think, and I did some odd jobs here and there. And I was very fortunate that my wife could work and keep the mortgage being paid and all that good stuff. That was probably the crutch that we needed to be able to make those sort of calls. I don't know if it was probably just more naive than anything else, making some of these calls. We just didn't know what it would be. But the group of people that we work with on these projects were really fun with, or one or two in particular. We just kept on talking about it and said, let's do it. And the other founder, Stuart, was at the time had moved to South Africa. He said, I'm going to drive from South Africa to Germany, and on the way I'm going to stop at every stock exchange in Africa and just see what they want. And he said, you start building
What was he driving?
software.
Was he in a Mini or something? What was he driving?
For his 50th birthday, he got a Land Rover. So it was all kitted out with roof, tent and fridge and all that good stuff.
So some people go on a safari through Africa. Stuart went on a stock exchange.
You kind of have the visual of him turning up at a stock exchange.
His wife actually wrote a book on the trip, so I can't. It's not called Out of Africa, but it's similar to that. If you ever want a good book recommendation about how to travel through Africa, that's a really good book.
Futures and Husband Options, probably. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And so what happened when he did that? So you were like, let us know how that goes, because that sounds like we could then build a product.
Yeah, so he came back and he's a very positive chap and said, everyone wants it. Let's build it, no sweat. We're onto something here.
So what were you building? Because tell us what you're building, because for those again who don't know, and it's not everyone's passion necessarily, but this is like mission critical infrastructure for exchanges, right? To state the obvious, we've got there's like an NZX out there. There's not a load of them out there. So what were you sort of building and who needed it? Our
sort of expertise was in post-trade.
Okay.
And so the best way to explain that is if you think of Trade Me.
Yep.
And the auctions happen on Trade Me, and that's all well and good. You end up with a buyer and a seller at the end. Mm-hmm. But then someone has to make sure that the money in the stock transfer at the right time. Right. You don't want to have the buyer who's put in his money, but he's got nothing.
I've bought the shoes on Trade Me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do the software that does that.
Right.
They call it delivery versus payment, DVP, just making sure that the shares and the cash exchange at exactly the same time, and it's all nice and legal and tight and sorted.
Does every country have an exchange? I mean, most people probably know very little about exchanges. They might own shares through the KiwiSaver or directly, or through Sharesies or whatever. And we've obviously got NZX here, we've got ASX in Australia, NASDAQ, whatever. But does every country have one? Do they have many? What's the state of play?
Every country definitely has a stock exchange, and a lot of countries have many exchanges. A commodity exchange, there might be a gold exchange somewhere. There might be in America. There are many exchanges. You've heard of the grain exchange, Chicago exchange. There's exchanges.
Power exchanges all over
Power
Europe.
exchanges, all sorts of shapes and colours and sizes. They're everywhere. Some are small, and some are really big.
And it's a great question, though, because so many people kind of close their eyes and imagine what happens at a stock exchange, and people are trading with their hands and stuff. And we know that's evolved. We love markets evolving, which is great. And it's not now. There's a lot of technology which is in place, and we're only now seeing prediction markets, and we're seeing crypto markets, etc. And we speak about that a lot. So it's actually the infrastructure that is built needs to be incredibly robust. So without downplaying what you did, that's not an easy thing to do, because a lot of people are then going, right, this is quite particular sort of technology that's being built. So you were like, there are some exchanges in Africa that might need it. Why did they need it? Did they not want to have the big players, or they needed something a little bit smaller? What was it they were looking for that you were going to offer to them?
If it's a really small network. With a lot of these things, you sort of you think, it's global. There must be lots of providers, but actually there aren't many. When we go to a conference, there's a handful of us. We all know each other. It's a small network, and I think that's true of a lot of businesses and a lot of places like that. I guess a lot of the incumbents at the time when we were starting out were almost some of the old blue screen type systems, so Unix based, so really expensive. You had to buy a big IBM machine that cost you mega bucks. It's not quite the case now, not quite the same now, but we were sort of one of the first ones that was looking at open source, not big Oracle licenses. Maybe even using AWS. We're probably one of the first ones to start doing that. So we're just sort of, I guess, at the right time to benefit from some of those technologies.
And were those smaller exchanges more likely to go, we'll give it a crack? Because if you went in and had that conversation about AWS and stuff with like a large national exchange, they might be like, oh no, it has to be on-prem, it needs to be. Do you feel like that was the ones like in Africa were more likely to go, if you can do it sort of for us for less price, that works?
I think it was usability and just being approachable and flexible and excited, engaged about doing things. I think a lot of the vendors perhaps, and as these bigger vendors do, they become a bit lazy, dare I say it, and they, in that sense, they become easier to pick off.
So who was the first client, the first cab off the rank for you, and what did that feel like? Because actually you've got the kids at home, you've got your wife working, you've got somebody driving around in a truck. Yeah. Who else did you have at the time?
There was three of us, and Ferry was our IT CTO.
Right, and he was an ex-NZX staff member as well? Or something?
He was a contractor in NZX at the time. Right. I guess it's probably one piece of advice when keep a track of when you're working with people at your various jobs. Keep a track of who you get on really well with. Work really well with.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be someone you socialise with or get on really well with, but there are. I can't put my finger on it, but you'll come across people that you can work with and do really work efficiently, get good things done. But hard to explain. You wouldn't match on a dating app.
Yeah, he's talking about me and him, really, aren't you, Martyn? We've known each other for a while. We work together. We work back working together. You're right, though.
That's a good piece of advice, really, especially for our younger listeners. Like you encounter people at work. They're not all the same. As you're saying, your friends are not necessarily the people you work best with. The same is true for sports or whatever, right?
It's true. Actually, I reflect on some of the companies I've worked with, and I've brought people on board that I've worked with in the past, and I brought people on when I went back to London and that I had worked with as well, because you're cutting through a lot of stuff, and you know how the way they're working and how good they are. Yeah. So there was a three of you. So the three of you are the founders of the company. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had Stuart on his Land Rover driving around, and we were building it, and he was sort of testing it as we went. The minimal viable product was ready, and then we realised we had to somehow sell it because we hadn't really thought about how that process would work.
Quite important in business.
Yeah. So we hadn't really thought about the sales process, and that's hard. I think that's a whole podcast in itself. But I guess our first client was actually, we started our own business. So we're in London, and we were speaking with some prospective clients and just long story short, we sort of spotted a bit of a gap to build what they call a registry, a stock registry. So you've heard of ComputerShare and some of those big companies.
What is a
that look
registry
after.
doing though? Just so people go back to the Trade Me example. What's the registry doing?
So a share register keeps a track of who owns all the shares.
Right.
So a company like NZX has got some shares.
Yep.
They might have so many million shares, and someone has to keep a register of who owns what. And in London, the register is called, or the stock exchange is called Crest.
Right.
And they hadn't been a new register in London for many years, so we're one of the first ones. So we're trying to learn how to actually connect to this Crest system. So the first client was actually a company we started up.
So you sold your technology to a company that you founded?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds like a Ponzi scheme to me.
Yeah, it does.
Tell us
like
more.
a Ponzi scheme. And what's that company called?
It's actually still got the same name. It is Avenir Registrars.
Right, got it.
I mean, we've sort of jostled along together. It's got a different management team. At times they've been ahead of us, and we've been ahead of them. Of them. But they're still going strong and doing well. I
mean, a great way to test your market, right? It clearly works, and so you've got that up and running and live. Look, it's really interesting in terms of how you start to see the gap, and we find that a lot. People are passionate, but they found a gap in the market. They build the product, and then they're like, I'm not a salesperson. And we talk about founder-led sales, and we know that you're very good at explaining things, and exchanges want to hear from you because you've worked from an exchange, but there is that gap. So what was the next cab off the rank for you?
Who did you sell to that wasn't related to you?
Yeah, exactly.
It is tricky. I mean, everyone you speak to, and I'm sure other people have experienced this, everyone says, I really like what you're doing. I'm really keen, but I'm not going to be first.
Yeah.
And,
sure.
And that's, that I guess that happened all the way through. Our first client actually links into our investor,
right.
Our first investor. Our first investor had a trading system,
right.
and we had the post-trade, the back-end system. He had a potential client that needed both.
Right.
And so we were connected with him, and that was our first client. And it was actually, it was Vietnam, setting up a derivatives exchange. So that was the first client, and it went really well.
So they had the trading system, but they didn't have the post-trade. You had the post-trade, and he was like, hey, listen, we should work together on this. But he or they were a company that then said, but actually we love what you're doing, let's also invest in you. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's sort of I guess another part of the story is that first investment, and we learned a lot on that for sure. We were starstruck by being offered money at the start, and so I guess that's the first piece of advice. Try to keep your feet on the ground when that happens, because it's hard to think carefully about what you're doing when you're in that emotional state. Where money's right there on the table in front of you, and you're starting to look at contracts. It's hard to think of all the possible things that could go wrong, and then double the worstness of it.
Yeah. And
that's what can happen.
Yeah.
And we've experienced some of that as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to tell you all the real nitty-gritty stories, but I can't. But it's think of the worst and double it, and sometimes you've sort of right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we get so many stories about
Yeah.
startups who take money. Like the biggest regrets from founders are often about either taking money in the first place or taking it from the wrong party, or taking the money but then not thinking about the second order consequences.
Yeah.
In generic terms, that's a pretty common.
I mean, I guess in many ways, when you step back, you were lucky that you had a good structure of founders, right? Because that could actually break you as well when somebody kind of wedges their way in and is, I'm your salesperson now, and I obviously know the story, and I understand the stress that it put you through. But I think you're right. It's that understanding that it's not to be necessarily ego-driven itself, but you know what? Like you have built an incredible product, and it stood alone on its right. But sometimes you just don't necessarily know. But it did get you into an exchange here in Asia Pacific, which was great. And that sort of from there you were able to sort of build upon it. One of the things that we're based in Wellington, right? You're from the heart. You've worked out of NZX, you've lived overseas, but you're building something which is a global piece of technology. So, you started off with Vietnam, and then you went into other areas as well. Tell us about that journey, because from, I think apart from, if I'm right, apart from maybe the exchange in the UK and also the registry, nearly all of the exchanges you've spoken to is English as a second language?
That's right. Yeah. Culture differences has been really interesting. And I mean, it's been the most exciting and fun part of it.
Yeah.
But it's also been the most frustrating at times as well. So
Can you think of some specific stories that?
I think a really good one was when this is back to the Vietnam example, and we delivered the UAT version or a version.
UAT being testing.
Yeah.
User acceptance testing.
User acceptance testing. Yeah. So before we went live, and they had a testing team, and they were coming back with, as you do, you come back with issues, and then we work through them, and we say, no, that's not an issue, that is, and we slowly work through them. We were a bit naive in that case, and we were getting emails from them saying, can you please fix this one ASAP, and then can you please fix this one ASAP. Being our first client, we wanted to please them all the time, so we thought, let's just do all this stuff. So we were releasing, thinking we were doing the right thing, but we just became overwhelmed with all of these. And then we said at one point, we've got to stop. We've got to somehow just take stock of where we're at, and maybe just release once a week or once every 2 weeks. And we were really worried about how they were going to take that, because all these emails are saying, you fix this one ASAP, you fix this one now. So we agonised over how to reply, and we just went back and said, this is how we're going to go forward, which is perhaps how we should have said right from the start. We're going to do 2 weekly releases. We'll deal with these ones in a couple of weeks' time. And they came, and the response was, okay, thanks.
Really?
And we just
You'd agonise.
And we'd agonise, and they just put ASAP on the bottom of their emails. Maybe because that's what they'd seen in another email somewhere. But in a Kiwi world, if you've got, it's like someone shouting at you every email. And we were so now we've come a lot more accustomed and better at handling those sorts of emails and giving ourselves time and a proper answer is no or later. But that was actually a really big learning experience to try and get that. Another good one was where something went wrong with one of our clients, and the culture was very much not losing face. To the point you'd lose your job if you did a mistake.
For them, it was going to, if they said they'd done a mistake. Okay, got it.
So something went wrong. There was a misconfiguration and something went wrong, and we got blamed for it. And it was really hard for us to wear that.
So I assume it was not your fault.
It was not our fault. We ended up wearing it. Everyone, I think, everyone in the company that knew what had actually happened, but that's what had to be the official record. Was it
right?
How did your people deal with that? The fact that you got to take it on the chin, it's our fault, but we know it's not.
Yeah, we struggled. But I guess we got over it in the end. But it's tough. It's tough when you got to play the politics, I guess. Yeah. And the politics in New Zealand's quite different to the politics in Vietnam or Kazakhstan or some of these different places.
So tell us about the stans. I know we've got technology in Kazakhstan, etc. as well, but that's another sort of journey of the cultural thing, because it's a really good point, right? We've got people that are building tech and they're saying, I'm going to go to Australia and America, which is perfect, right? But Avani's gone and in trucks around Africa and through Kazakhstan and into Vietnam and other places where those cultural discussions and norms are sometimes really foreign to individuals. I know we've talked about Middle East before, and we've had conversations here on the couch about what that means when you deal with them. So tell me a little bit more about, they obviously are quite keen to work with you, but you're sort of saying, we're here in Wellington, and they're like, okay, what does that mean? Tell me a little bit more about that, Martyn.
I think one of the biggest things we tell the developers and when we're building the system is that when you're building this and testing it, just remember you're the one that has to support it at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. And that sort of focuses the mind quite a bit. I think when you're on support 24/7 in that sense, it does help focus the mind. So I think the first thing is solid code.
Right.
Test and make sure that things aren't going to break.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one. I think the other one, people can be quite particular about, we need support within 15 minutes or 30 minutes. But, there's not many issues. In fact, there's, maybe there are no issues in a business where you have to have that sort of response time. So it's just talking through the scenarios and working through with people and explaining how you've dealt with it before. And people sort of get it. I think they people just want this real-time sort of think they need this real-time support, but they don't.
Well, it's true. I mean, we know that a lot of our a lot of the national exchanges, some of them are listed, and they've got shareholders that are across them, and critical infrastructure. Again, it needs to have the uptime it's required. We know when NZX might have an outage, or we see when ASX have been down and they haven't been able to trade. We know because we've also been on both sides of the fence. So it does mean that you build the right infrastructure and you make sure the right process is there and people know how to feel it. But you are right, people can go without it for a while, which I think is really sort of interesting. But in terms of also the way that you sort of look at your business and you're sort of growing the business and thinking about it, there is the exchanges that have got the actual technology in place already. And I'd like to sort of touch a little bit on some of the, as you say, the incumbents, but they've got big brand names behind them. And you sort of mentioned the likes of the NASDAQ Technologies and the Tata Consulting. These are big billion-dollar companies, and then there's you and Wellington going, and we would like to sort of get a piece of your pie. How does that work when you're sort of talking to people about who you are? How do you raise profile? We've talked about this on the couch a lot. How do you make Avenir look, feel, be big, and they're out there playing with the big boys and girls?
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough. There's probably another competitor there as well that is just as big, and that's internal software development.
Yeah.
So exchanges thinking they can build the stuff themselves.
You used to be one of those, obviously.
Yeah.
And so they can think they can build themselves. Maybe they've been stung by a vendor in the past. Yeah, they're a competitor as well. So I think the other big thing is that this is an infrastructure software. It's not something that you sell in 5 minutes. You don't meet someone and then you've sold and then you're installed and you're on to the next one.
It's a lot of people need to get their head around that a little bit. I know that we've talked about enterprise sales. People suck their teeth and go, not for me. I need to be selling on a weekly basis to get that. But actually, it's a really good point, Martyn. Can you explain a little bit about that sales cycle of what you do and what enterprise sales means in terms of what we have to do?
Yeah, so some of the people in these stock exchanges may have never replaced a system before, and they may only ever do it once in their career.
Right.
So for them, it's a big, risky thing, and that's where that saying "you don't get fired for hiring NASDAQ" comes from, because you don't you're doing this once and you've got to get it right. So you certainly have to get people comfortable. I think the other big thing that we use is we've got great relationships with our existing customers. So using our existing customers to help support that process is really helpful. Fortunately, there's quite a lot of conferences in the space, so we can get around people quite easily. But it's long-term relationships. One of the clients I'd love to have would be NZX, and we've been speaking with them for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's a really slow process. It's relationship building. And maybe you can do a small piece of work for them and then move into a bigger piece of work. But then sometimes you're at the right place at the right time and the job's available.
Yeah.
And how do you know in the sales process that the prospect, being a conservative exchange in somewhere, Kazakhstan or otherwise, is ready to back not the big guy, not the IBM or not the NASDAQ Technologies? How do you know they're ready to choose the small guy?
Yeah. I mean, maybe just to answer the question slightly differently. We had a lot of people who've come to us and said, we love what you want to do. We're starting up a new exchange. Can you give us your tech and we'll give you some shares. Right. Lots of people have said that. So there's lots of people that think that's the way in, but it never works, or we've never taken on something like that. It's really hard. I mean, an RFP process is one way in which you can stand out for everyone else. Obviously, things are a lot more on the table and open. It's really hard when you have to come up against a big sales team with one of these guys. But it's just the relationships and building the relationships, proving that you have done it before, and then when they speak to your customers and see that you have done it before, then you can win them over.
I mean, it's important to note as well that these big vendors have also paved the way to allow you to do what you're doing, right? Because they have shown you it can be done, and you've also got the right fit for that. And so there's a lot of mutual respect when you go to these sort of conferences. They're like, look, there is space for you. Do I want to be selling a big, technology into a little exchange? No, there is a space for everybody, which works well. But actually what's happening now, we're seeing this evolution of people sort of saying, actually, I'd like some change. I like innovation. I want to know what you guys are doing when it comes to AI. There's crypto exchanges bouncing out everywhere. And actually there's a lot more opportunity out there in the markets that we get sort of probably seeing, Martyn. So,
and I think, Serge, to your point, I think we're getting pretty good at determining when we're speaking with people whether they would be interested in going with a smaller company.
And what are those attributes? Because we
Yeah.
have lots of startups, a very significant proportion of those are selling to enterprise. All of them will have multiple stories of, we had a great relationship, we've got the best product, probably cheaper than the big guys, and then when it comes to the RFP and the decision being made, the gravitation just goes to status quo, right?
Exactly.
So how do you know in your world, what is it that the prospect needs to do to tell you or convince you that this time it won't be like that?
Yeah, it's you never know. It's hard. Yeah, it is hard work. I think it's obvious when you're not in the running and you're just making up the numbers.
Well, do you want to tell people about that? Because again, so many times I come across founders who clearly not in the running, but they're like, but we've been given an RFP to respond to. So
yeah.
That doesn't make you in the running.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of the biggest learnings is when we started out, we thought, we're the three smartest guys in the room. We've built this great stuff. Why wouldn't people buy us? I mean, why not? But yeah, the reality of
so how
selling
do you know
stuff is different.
You're having your chain yanked?
You don't always know, but unfortunately, I think it's just experience and understanding, being able to ask the right sort of questions at the right time. And Intel, I mean, as I said, the markets and the networks in the space are really small, so we people know who's going for what and where it's at. It may be that there's an incumbent in the place that has issued the RFP, so you know that incumbent's sort of got a foot in the door or a leg up already. Yeah, so I guess it's weighing up all those sorts of things. And finding the right decision maker that's going to take a punt, dare I say it. Yep.
And we can talk a little bit, I could talk a little bit about the decision. When we were at NZX, the NASDAQ system was in place for trading, and we had a CEO come in and say, but I want to grow this business. I want to take it from the New Zealand Stock Exchange to make it an exchange. I want derivatives, I want commodities, I want electricity. And it was really expensive to do that with the technology that was in place. So sometimes you've got to kind of almost like leave a job to move into another job kind of scenario, where they made a decision to bring in quite unquote risky decision to bring in a trading system that perhaps wasn't known, and that was to allow them to sort of grow and actually evolve as a small national exchange. And actually over time, NASDAQ's technology has come back into the New Zealand Exchange, which has worked really well for them, but at the time they needed to be able to have somebody who could be quick and nimble and could help them grow. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that. And, people are saying, well, I could go down this route, but the reality is I know where I fit in this ranking as well. And if I'm a small exchange, sometimes I don't have the breadth of sort of gravitas to make the changes that are wanting to be made at the time. We see that a little bit, I think, with RFPs. But to your question, Serge, you'll find that people are just, it's a really tricky one at the time.
Yeah, and again, we've got lots of young founders or all sorts of people and startups, many of whom are going through essentially pointless selling processes. And I guess if there's any shortcuts or anything that you could provide as insight on, here's how you know it's probably not worth your time, or what are the signals that indicate that may be the case.
I think it's probably it's hard experience. Understanding the network and knowing your competitors and where they're at is part of it. I think just having a better, more formulaic process at responding to RFPs. I think when we first started, we tried to tailor every RFP or every engagement, and spent a lot of time finessing it exactly for the client. Whereas perhaps think about standardising some of that stuff so that you can. Cookie cutter's probably going too far, but you can sort of repeat and do that and have a catch there or something that gets someone to come back. And if they come back, then you've at least got onto that next step. I mean, that's the other big thing we've learned, that until you've got a signed contract and got your first payment, or maybe your second payment, you're not in. We've had contracts we've signed and people have walked away.
Sure. Even in your world, it's crazy.
We've had
big exchanges. They've just said, sign with us, and then gone, change our mind.
Yeah. And we've also had a situation where we spent a lot of time with the customer. We're working on a contract. We were very, very close, within days of signing with them. It would have made a massive difference to us at the time. And a competitor came in and threatened legal action on the exchange if they went with us. So nothing we could do.
What was the basis of the legal action?
Basically, the exchange was wanting to leave the competitor, but the contract that they had was potentially not breakable, as it were. And so, they just sort of scared them off that way.
So it was easier for them to say, fine, we'll stay with you guys, and to kind of take the leap, which was this on
there's
the...
absolutely nothing
yeah.
we could do about it because
Right.
it was not our,
Yeah.
you know, all we could say was, well, you know, we'll stand by our side if you're happy to fight the fight with this other person.
How did that feel? I mean, that's a kind of, we talk a little bit about bullying behaviour, right? And we see some of these big guys are out there, big guys and girls that are out there. How do you pick yourself up from something like that, Martyn, when that was, to your point, potentially going to be a bit of a make or break? Because you've got to make peace with it, right?
Yeah, it
At
took
some
a while.
point.
I mean, it was the probably the single most stressed I've been in the job was when hearing the call to say, no, we're not going with you now, when we invested all that time and effort.
And was it the effort, or was it the unfairness of it? What was the thing that broke your heart, so to speak?
Yeah, no, the unfairness of it. I think the unfairness, and that's another big learning is how naive we were at the start, thinking that contracts were worth the paper they were written on. We've learned a whole lot about what leverage means in these situations. If you're waiting on being paid, then they have the leverage. There's not much you can do. If they're not paying, contract's not going to do much. If your contract payment is, say, $100,000, it's going to cost you more than $100,000 to go to court. So, you can't do much.
So, I talk about leverage a lot. I run a training workshop called Carrots and Sticks, and the core principle there is design the stick before you start offering a carrot. So if you talk about leverage and enterprise, again, there's going to be specific situations. But how do you think about leverage in sort of prospect and customer relationships?
Well, as I say, I think we thought contracts would help us do that, and the dispute section in the contract would just make
cover everything.
Yeah, would solve it. My personal opinion now is that I don't want a dispute section in my contract. Sometimes you get in an argument with someone, and they'll call it a dispute, but I don't think it's a dispute. I don't want to argue with you about it. You come to court if you want to sue me for it, but it's not a dispute in my eyes. So I don't want to be forced down some legal process because you think it's a dispute.
So what do you do instead?
Well, you play chicken.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's the leverage and being able to play chicken better, understanding when you're when you have that leverage or whether you're in the right and they're going to have to come to you, then that's real hard. That's probably the biggest learning. I don't think I've solved it yet, but getting a lot better at understanding that. It sort of goes back to that initial thing I mentioned about you fix ASAP. We sort of didn't realise that we're actually offering a really good service, and it just changing the way we're doing it was fine.
So with customers you do have leverage because they've got your product, you can switch it off, you can do other things, presumably. With prospects, how do you find leverage?
That is a real hard one, and that's coming down to how do you. I guess the bottom line is how do you price for that? And there's a real temptation to go, if we'll just go lower, we'll get this one. If we get lower, we'll get this one. And for a while, that was the sort of prevailing thought. It was, we just go a bit lower, we'll get it. But I think it's just understanding that the price is not the only thing. And we're working with one of our existing clients at the moment, and we were offering some extra software for them, and we provided a price. It was a competitive price for another piece of software. They ended up going with someone else. But I said to him, is it the price? He goes, it's not the price. It's nothing to do with the price. It's there's a whole lot of politics going on behind the scenes, and we're going with this other guy for this reason. And understanding that sort of stuff. It's not, as I say, it's not easy. Sadly it's an experience thing, and you need to sort of do those role plays and think about what is motivating this guy. Why is he acting in this way? What can I do that would help him, and also help me? I think that naivety, thinking that there's some sort of perfect solution where everyone's you're happy and everyone's happy is. There's two worlds in that.
My advice generally is any successful transaction has everyone mildly irritated at the end of it. That's the best you can hope for.
I agree.
Yeah.
Which is not very aspirational for wannabe founders and people working in startups.
But it's a reality, right?
And any legal dispute is going to not work out as happily as you thought.
Even if you're the victor,
and no matter how much confidence you get from your legal support, it's a horrible process. And if you can avoid that at all costs, that's where you want to be.
So on a more cheery note, Avenir is, and What's your footprint? Where are you guys trading? How many transactions? What's the general shape of the business?
Yeah, we're all over the globe, all over the map, as it were. Yeah, been in, I think, all continents.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest client we had at the time, I think, was Vietnam, as we mentioned. We're doing over 200,000 trades a day, which is a lot. That's on a futures market. That's big. Some of our markets are quite small, and sort of starting out, and others.
What sort of countries are we talking about? So obviously we talked about Vietnam, Kazakhstan to some extent.
Yeah, we've been in South Africa and Malawi. We've doing commodities products. We're in London and Channel Islands, Vietnam, Argentina, and Kazakhstan. We actually have been in.
I'm from Argentina.
Yeah, he's
so
very
I'm
excited
very
about that. Now he
that.
really loves us.
Buenos Aires, yeah.
Get him a hat.
I've been there a couple of times. It's great. Yes, they're great people. Yeah, so we're all over the place, but we're actually what we're really focusing on just at the moment, and we're really quite keen to get them to do some more stuff in New Zealand. Yeah, I guess we perhaps haven't had the confidence as much as we had needed at the time, but now we've with Adrian joining the team, and we've got a lot more of a sort of New Zealand history and track record. So we're looking or excited about doing more stuff in New Zealand.
Still a really good test market here, right? Like you do something well here and you look at the sort of broader capital markets in places like New Zealand. It is still a small team and it still can be something which is to be really proud about. And if you do something well here, you can take it to Australia. You have the conversation in Canada. You can go into London. And I think that when you've got a small community of people within New Zealand who recognise you of doing good stuff and actually have a proven record, leverage it, to use a word, right? Get in there. It does take time. And I think of people that are listening, we talk about sales or in that sort of blend of business development. And the beauty of the team that Martyn has built out is they really understand what's happening in exchanges. They know what it's like to be working in a small exchange because I've worked in them. I've worked for the Canadian Exchange, the London Exchange, the International Futures Exchange, a number of them, and I know what it's like to push a vendor as well. So the first thing you do when you're at an exchange is you kind of go, make the vendor do it. So when you're on the other side of it, that becomes really interesting. And so many people that I speak to that have listened to this podcast or are building businesses or startups, they've often found that problem, which you did, Martyn, by working in the problem and working in the place and solving the problem. And then it's about really having that passion for it. And Martyn and the team have definitely got that, which I think is really important. So, there are people out there there are big exchanges that are looking to buy companies like Avenir. So in terms of, it's probably a good question, Martyn, when you sort of woke up with the team in the beginning, what did it look like in terms of, should we bring on some additional capital? Do we, go and raise a whole lot of money? What does that look like for you? Because I know some are really keen to do that. You might bring on $10 million and see how far we can go. What do those decisions look like as you sort of evolved over the years? Because a lot of people are nervous about that. Serge and I sit with a whole lot of companies here in Wellington and they're like, when do I start bringing on capital, or what do I do? And sometimes you're like, whoa, hang on, let's just, hold your horses. Let's just start up with what you've got.
Yeah, when we first started throwing around the ideas of doing this, of course our idea was worth megabucks.
Yeah.
So we could have got money really easily. Yeah. But I think it dawned on us pretty quickly that we thought, we hadn't built anything. It was just an idea. If we had taken on any money, probably any money at all, we would have lost control. It would have been more than 50%,
right.
Easy. So I think that was perhaps one of the key points to say, hang on, we don't want to be more than 50% owned by someone else. So that was our first sort of, stage to do it ourselves. And as I mentioned before, my wife was working. We were okay for money, so we didn't have to mortgage. Fortunately, the extra mortgage on the house, and we were able to do that ourselves. So that was really lucky. So if you can do, the more you can do before you get the money, the better.
Right.
So then when we did get an investor, the numbers we were thinking were a lot higher. So the value of the company was higher, and we could get quite a bit of money for a lower percentage. So it was So, but the further you can get down that track, the better. We could definitely have done that. I think maybe times have changed a wee bit. One of the founders has retired, and we're thinking about the next phase. So our next investment sort of discussion might be a bit different. But up until now, we've been able to do it ourselves with that small investment that we mentioned that we've since actually brought back a management buyout last year. So we own the owners are the management team, 100%. So I think if you can do it on your own, go as far as you can before you get money, I think would be would be my advice.
Which makes sense for Avenir, not for everybody. I get. I would say it's not all startups, but I get what you're saying. Really would like to touch on the point because that's interesting too. Like there were 3 founders, and actually, it could be obvious. I came on board 3 years ago or so, but you've got one who's sort of stepped away. How does that change the dynamic, and how do they sort of feel about it? Do they sort of sit afar and wave at you, and what does that look like? Because there'll be people again that are listening to this, going through the similar journey, because it's a passion project for all 3 of you, and then somebody sort of has to step away, not has to, but rightly is allowed to retire.
And again, when you're starting up in that first phase, it's exciting. Yeah, you can't visualize someone in the group retiring. I mean, that's you're just
you
there, and you're always going to be there.
Yeah,
and that is a fun part of the exercise. And we're really lucky that the 3 founders, throughout the process, were. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but we had arguments, but we never fell out.
Right.
Yeah, it was has been a great relationship, all 3. But we're moving into the next phase with one of the founders retiring. I think the other aspect is dilutions it can be a problem as you're growing and really change the dynamics of founders. And so that's something to be really wary of. I know a lot of people will say, I'd rather have a small percentage of a really big company versus a larger percentage of maybe a nothing company. But when the rubber hits the road and that dilution happens, it's different. It's a different ball game. It's hard to let go, and so I think that's another thing you have to be.
And you guys all believed or knew that right at the start?
No, we didn't. I guess that's the point. We didn't. That's why I'm saying it's hard now, is because those sorts of discussions are happening, and it's difficult. It's really difficult, and no matter how much you can.
Would you say that's a naivety again, because you did go in there really just wanting to build something and not probably thinking about the bigger plan or picture, I guess.
Yeah, succession planning and that sort is hard. And as I say, fortunately, we have all been on the same page throughout, so it's worked.
Yeah.
But we're moving into that phase where that stuff's hard, where people are going, the team gets a bit bigger and the founders are sort of going their own ways for one reason or another, and it can be tough. I guess if you can have it be as open and honest as you can when talking with each other, that would be the best advice there. That stuff can simmer away and be hard on the relationships.
Yeah. And talk about sort of relationship stress. What's the level of risk or liability from a cyber security perspective? So you guys running 200,000 daily trades in Vietnam, right? Presumably, as you're saying, this kind of goes to settlement of money. Presumably, lots of people are interested in hacking their way into the bowels of your software.
Yeah.
How do you guys think about that? Where do the liabilities sit? To what extent does it keep you up at night?
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
There's, I guess, there's two types of clients. One where they host it themselves. In that example, they're responsible for network security. In Vietnam, as an example, they operate on a totally closed network. So to support them, we have it's not Skype anymore, but we used to have a Skype. We had a Skype session open with a video, and they were holding their camera up to the screen and would say, type this, type that. That's how support worked. Okay. So from that case, I wasn't worried about hacking there. But another group of clients, we do the AWS hosting and we look after it. It's a ugly world out there. There's people trying to hack your systems all day long. And that's just automated robots, let alone people really wanting to get you. I think the biggest advice I'd get there would be to have a backup plan. I can't remember exactly when I got that advice, but I used to stress about exactly that problem. And then someone said to me, well, what's your backup plan? And then as soon as you spend a bit of time on thinking about what your backup plan is and being prepared for that sort of stuff, it actually becomes easier. So just if something like that happens, we've got a switch, we know how to turn things off, we've got backups, we're prepared. And
do you rehearse those? Do you try them in the real world, in production?
Yeah, we have. We connect to, one of our clients connects to Swift. You've probably heard of the Swift network. They have a comprehensive annual auditing process. We have to spend £10,000 a year with an auditor who comes through and sort of kicks the tyres and checks everything. So, that stuff is checked all the time.
Yeah, which is really important, right? Because again, going back to how you get chosen, you can't just be saying, oh, we just see how we go. Like, these are the important parts of actually when you go through the RFP process, they're asking these questions, right? Which is really important.
Yeah, it's frustrating. doing audits with those sorts of things.
Yeah.
You've heard of the data protection audits, all these sorts of audits. They are frustrating, but I do try to see the positive side of it, that it's your backup plan.
Yeah.
And doing that actually helps you sleep at night.
Yeah. Martyn, it's never really lost on me the human side of being a founder, right? Like, these are the things that we've got people listening. And in the beginning, you talked about your son saying, "Dad, why are you working so much?" And you just had your son coming into work out of university over Christmas doing some testing for us, which was, I would say, as a parent, a pretty proud moment, because not only is he a great kid, he is just genuinely as proud of you than anyone is, which I think is amazing. And it's a massive credit to you and everybody else. But what is it that you feel that sometimes, it's a question that you don't have to answer necessarily, what are you most proud of at the moment, right now where you stand?
I guess I never set out to be owning a business or being an entrepreneur, but it is it is really satisfying having relationships all around the world, and being able to travel all around the world and to work with people all around the world, versus being, I guess, stuck in just Wellington in one place. Not that I don't love New Zealand. So I think that will be the most proud. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. I think that the next stage is going to be a new chapter as we grow a bit bigger and need to delegate a bit more. But it's been fun.
So you've kind of transitioned out of the CEO role. What is your role now, and how did you find the transition process? Obviously handing over the keys to Adrian here.
Yeah. We sort of didn't really have a true CEO. It was sort of, in the early days, it was the founders doing their own thing. And we needed, and that was fun, and it worked well, but we really needed a bit of parental supervision. And so my wife came along, she's a management consultant, and knocked us into shape. And then with Adrian, we've been further sort of organised, and it is a phase. So the first phase is fun and real easy. It is, as you start growing, that next phase is a bit of an adjustment. But it's a necessary, that's the way of, it's the nature of these things. That's the way it happens. So, so I probably spend too much looking at code than I should.
I tell them off all the time.
I keep getting told to not do that, and do more of the sort of salesy type things. But my happy place is, I'm a I guess a logic type thinker. So I find logic type decisions real easy to solve. Some people may freak out with a complex tech problem, but I find those problems really easy to solve. But what I feel under extreme pressure in a subjective type decision. So how do we price for this client? I find that really, really stressful, because I could do it this way and win the deal. I could do it that way and lose the deal, but it's totally subjective.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think I'm being forced into more subjective type.
Well, that's great
problems.
Self-awareness as well. To
It
know
really
the kind
is.
of problems you flourish in and the ones that stress you out, especially possibly unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're listening as well, like I have the privilege of coming in, but also being able to, we talk a lot about with that, some of the guys and girls that we have, and create a team around you that can help you see who you truly are and what you're really about as well. And actually, one of the things that I knew immediately, Martyn and I know each other well, and I know Rachel really well, and Stuart I'd worked with as well. So it really it helped, and also I was incredibly passionate about it. But also I was like, guys, you've got some great technology. To go into a company and not be like, guys, let's sort the technology out, and because you've got product and sales guys out there selling everything, was a dream come true in my world, right? Because I had worked in many other places it wasn't quite the case. And so I think recognising it and explaining to them just how good it is and how competitive it is and how it can stand on its own was, in many ways, Martyn was like, really? And I was like, yeah, right? And then to be able to sort of take it and elevate the name and the brand of what it's doing and make sure that people really recognise it is not because I'm out there talking about it necessarily all the time. It's because it really stands on its own 2 feet. So I think you should be really proud of that. Yeah,
I think one of the big things in recent time, and Adrian's very strong on this, is you can't sell a secret. And I think sort of taking that sort of concept in a bit further, the 3 founders, being 3 men of a particular age, we're not, we're sort of a bit sort of scared of putting their head above the parapet, didn't want to blow their own trumpet necessarily, and that was putting us outside of our comfort zone. I think that's part of that sales thing and trying to sell a story. We need to get a lot better at selling stories. So that will be the advice to, whether it's to your customers or potential customers, but even to your staff. I guess we were sort of a bit more internal, and we're making all these smart decisions, and everyone was working, but you need the stories.
Yeah, this humility is a national Achilles heel.
Isn't it?
It's just it's drastic.
Yeah.
That's probably one failure of not failure is the wrong word, but one of the weaknesses of the three founders was that we perhaps weren't as good as telling the stories and puffing us up as much as we should.
So
it
common.
is.
Our economy would flourish in such a substantially different way if it wasn't the case.
And this podcast came to mind when we were at one of your growth jams, and 3 people walked away from having a conversation with Martyn, and I heard them going, "Did you know they've just put technology into the Palestinian exchange? Did you know that there was cars?" And I could hear them talking about Avenir, and I was like, "You are not talking about this company nearly enough. A, because you're in Wellington, but B, because it's just a great story, Martyn." And that's why I was like, we've got to be telling it a little bit more, because there are so many people listening that don't know just, A, obviously how hard it is in many ways. We are not dismissing that, but tell the story, right? And tell the story. Come and sit on our couch and tell the story, eh, Serge?
Exactly. So
Now, we're not going to hammer you too long, honestly, on this, because what we like to do is also get a bit of a sense of you. Sometimes we do quick fire questions, don't we?
we certainly do.
We love quick fire questions. And don't worry, it's going to be like, I don't know, favourite beer. Actually, you love beer, so we can talk about that. But we'll start with you, Serge. Give your top 2 quick fire questions. Martyn, no pressure.
My favourite question is, advice to your former self. Put yourself in the shoes of, your first job, your first year in your first job. And you say, hey, you have an opportunity to be entrepreneurial sometime down the track. What advice would you give your former self?
I think I probably did some of the things. The advice is probably some of the things I did do. I got some advice really early on, and someone said to me, you should always be trying to do yourself out of a job. And I think where a lot of people perhaps get stuck is that they keep perhaps not consciously, but keep a bit of every job they're doing. And so it's hard to move on, because he's the guy that does that, or he's the guy that looks after that. So you can't move on. I think that was one of the best pieces of advice I got, was to finish a job and ask for the next one. Don't sort of hang on to a bit of each job, because you get to a point where you can't move anywhere.
Awesome. And your 3 founders still in great relationship. What's like the single best attribute of your dynamic or your relationship as the 3 co-founders that has held you in good stead or helped you retain those relationships? Because we see startup founders split up, get into violence, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Clearly it's worked for you. What's worked?
I think we're at a similar intellect together, and in a competitive way. I guess we sort of feed off each other quite well. And so intellectually speaking, if I solve a problem, then the next guy thinks, I'm going to solve the next one a bit better, and so we sort of feed off each other. I mean, when we first started, Google Docs had just come out, and we're doing an RFP or some sort of document, and I would type the first one, and then Stuart would be overseas. He'd compete to finish the next section the day, and then I'll come in the morning and finish the next one. So I think that it's just sort of it's hard to explain how that works, but that intellectual, we're on the same level, so I don't think anyone feels higher or lower than the other person. It's safe, and we sort of happily compete with each other.
Great answer.
Yeah. Best efficiency tip?
AI's getting pretty good.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, AI's getting pretty good at stuff.
What in particular have you been using AI for?
I think where I find it is, we call it the first shitty draft, and it is really hard, whether it's a document or an email or something. It's hard to get your first draft down, and you can agonise on that forever. And I find AI is really good at that. You just do some bullet points of a couple of ideas you're thinking about, and say, give me hit send or hit compose on the email, and it gives you just a great. It might not be what you land on and finish on, but it just takes that cognitive load out of trying to structure something. Just done. On the flip side, we've had a couple of clients and potential clients who've sent us through specs that have clearly, one of them actually said created by Grok at the bottom of it, and it shows, and it's not good at devil in the detail stuff, and that's one of my catchphrases. When you're building software, you need to know exactly how it's working, and
especially in your domain, right?
Yeah, and it needs to be specified right to the nth degree, and sadly. Some of these auto RFP creation type things don't do that.
Favourite holiday place?
Well, I've always gone to Wairariri Beach, which is between Foxton and Otaki.
About
as a
90
family
minutes
beach.
north of Wellington.
Lovely.
For those who don't
Don't
know.
go there.
I'm a lifeguard there, and my happy place would be doing a lifeguard patrol there with my boys on a summer's day, a nice warm summer's day, and going for a surf.
Perfect. Well,
I love that.
We should leave things there on a warm summer's day here in the capital.
We can't be at Wellington on a good day. We are waiting for the rain. Martyn, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for trusting us to tell the story, because I know that obviously this is a first podcast for you, but it's been really informative, and hopefully there's been some decent nuggets for people to take away, which has been great. So thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great conversation with Martyn. So many relatable bits, especially because both you and I have done enterprise sales, enterprise software, financial services. But yeah, really useful nuggets around co-founder relationships, around why do business around the world, around some of the hard stuff about selling and qualifying prospects and making sure the opportunities are real.
For sure. And I think the things that I do know a lot of the story, but there's a lot of stuff that in those early days where you're making those decisions and you're not sure if it's the right one and you're following your nose, and you're sort of having conversations with people like, we think you're great. And you're like, are we great? Like, God, somebody else thinks we're great. And I think his advice around just really pause around then. If someone's wanting to invest in you and they're, sort of throwing all these beautiful compliments or love bombing you, I guess, just be really mindful of that. I thought that was really interesting from his perspective. But look, I obviously really have got a lot of time and a lot of respect for Martyn and the Avenir team and what they're doing. So I'm just so excited that he came on and told us what he's been up to and tell the Avenir story.
Great. What a privilege.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on Startup Theatre.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Take care.